what happens is we're in a culture, we're in an age where we use like I am an emotion. Like I am anxious. I'm an anxious person. I am really afraid. And it creates this identity of everything basked in anxiety or fear or whatever. And a big shift that I have learned is this idea of these different parts of ourself. It's called like internal family systems therapy or parts work. It's like the big shift that I made is like there is a part of me who is terrified. There is a part of me that is so afraid. And there's also a part of me who is like, I'm a badass. I'll work through anything. I know my mission and vision. And like that badass part of me can come and send some love and comfort to to the part of me that's feeling anxious and afraid and say, come, we got this. I got you. Like we're gonna be okay. And oftentimes rather than being like, I need this anxiety to go away, it's like, how can we really just send that little part of ourselves some love? Because it's like our little inner child all grown up. But I think it helps us to stop getting caught up as like, this is my identity. This is who I am. It's just a part of who we are.
Life's too short for bad coffee or bad leadership. I'm Lindsay Yellen, executive leadership coach, coffee enthusiast, and former ad VP turned believer in leading from a place of possibility. On Unfiltered Leadership, we skip the buzzwords and dig into the messy, human, and powerful side of leadership with real conversations and practical takeaways. Now grab your mug. Let's dive in. When work feels like wildfire, layoffs, pivots, pressure, how do you lead with courage instead of contracting in fear? Today's guest is Katy Culver, who helps ambitious generalists in tech and consulting get crystal clear, land dream roles, and build businesses. She's guided over 130 leaders with a blend of strategy and identity work so you act like the CEO of your career. We talk reframing risk, leading through uncertainty, and the small, courageous moves that create confidence without giving it all away. A truly fantastic conversation that I loved every second of. Grab your mug, settle in. Here's Katy. Hey, Katy, welcome to Unfiltered Leadership. I am so honored and grateful that you could join us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, Lindsay.
And we have a lot to talk about. We have a lot of overlapping in the professionals and leaders that we serve. And when we met, we were introduced by a common connection and friend. And for those listening, Katy and I were just kind of putting like a, you guys should meet, connect call, which was about 30 minutes. And within 5 minutes, we were talking into the deep, unfiltered topics that we like to get into here, like we had been colleagues or partner coaches for years. So I knew immediately that you were the perfect person to invite on here and to share your wisdom and insight and tools and lessons and everything that you have with our listeners today. So I'm really
Yeah,
excited to
thank you.
see where this is going to go. But before we dig into all of that, what's in your mug today, Katy? I always got to ask.
Well, it's usually coffee. I'm a huge coffee drinker, usually espresso, but I do have water today.
Okay. I appreciate that. And I love your little white ceramic mug for those that can't see. Today I am drinking, actually, this feels really appropriate. Okay. I'm drinking a tea, which I don't usually do, but I feel like I keep saying that here. But that's just the season of my life. C'est la vie. But I am drinking a Downton Abbey tea, which is so weird. I
Mm.
found it in my closet or my pantry for my mom. And the next movie's coming out. And I just realized that. I'm like, oh my God, it just came out. So it feels very appropriate. So I'm drinking some very royal tea in a yellow, orange, pink mug that is from an incredible People Via Plants, I think is the name of the ceramic artist out on the East
Mm.
Coast. And they make
It's
really, really
beautiful.
beautiful mugs, isn't it? Yeah. So,
Yeah, I love that. This is just like a really basic one.
hey, sometimes basic is the most beautiful. Katy, where I want to start us off today is something that like undeniably is so relatable because at every conversation I'm having with leaders, it's coming up. So last week I was in LA with a group of executives at an agency. Yesterday, I led a workshop with other senior leaders in a different agency, and the same topics came up of just having to lead through so much uncertainty. And
Mm.
despite feeling like they should feel secure, or maybe the company's doing well, or that nobody feels truly secure, and that they
Mm.
have to lead their teams through this culture of fear, sometimes coming from the top down. Sometimes it's coming from the outside in, right? We live in very
Mhm.
just intriguing times. But where they struggle is they're like, I also have to lead them when I'm feeling the same way they are. Yet they're looking to me
Mm.
to be that place of like security and
Yeah.
comfort. And I'm just realizing that leadership always takes a lot of courage, whether leading yourself, your career, or others. But there's like a different level of courage that's needed right now. So I'm just curious what you're seeing around that with your professionals and what are some tools or topics that come up with you with
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, that's super valid of like, okay, there's this culture. It feels like we're bathing in fear all the
Yes.
time. You open your phone and it's like negative, something to be afraid of, all the reasons why it's not going to work. And if we allow that to be like what we think about all the time, it's really hard to even see the brightness, the lightness, the possibility. Like we're so focused on problems, we can't think about possibilities. And I think this, I know we're like, maybe we'll talk about this. And I feel like it's relevant, but it's like we get so focused on the near term, day to day, like what's happening right now and focus on like the problems at hand, firefighting, those things, rather than being able to zoom out and be like, okay, even if we're in this temporary discomfort, this temporary dip, where's the bigger vision that we're trying to all work towards? Like, what is the common goal here? How can we continue to like rally around that mission rather than getting so focused on like the day-to-day challenges? Because the challenges we're experiencing, like these scary moments, yes, we can acknowledge the fear, and I think leaders should do that, like model like, yeah, this is uncomfortable, I'm feeling it too. Like people don't want a leader who like fakes it. They want somebody who's authentic, who's like, yeah, guys, I'm scared and here's how we're operating anyway. Here's how I'm tapping into courage. These are the moves that I'm making because this vision that I have, this mission that we're all working toward is greater than our fear or is
And
worth pursuing through the fear.
yeah. And so what I'm hearing, and I want to repeat back because I think it's really powerful, is grounding your team, also yourself in purpose. So how do you zoom out? Because you're right. And in the industries I work a lot with, in creative industries and advertising and agency world, there's always a new fire to fight. And then you layer on all the other shit on top of it. And you're like, oh my God, how can I even like imagine thinking about a week from now versus like, you know, even longer term than that. But
Hmm.
as a leader, it is your job to create perspective for your
Hmm.
team and to create perspective for yourself. But we can also, I think this is something you'll probably relate to too. Our perspectives can so often get clouded by that fear. And I don't think we often realize that our perspectives are a choice. We are always in choice with our perspectives.
Oh, yeah.
And I talk to folks and they feel like they're just being ruled by only seeing something in one way. So maybe it's from like fear-driven place or that scarcity place.
Hmm.
So how do you
Yeah.
support clients in getting and shifting perspectives to being one that can be more possibility fueled and tap into
Yeah.
greater courage?
I have a couple of things that come to mind right now. I think what you said of like people get really stuck in this spiral of like, oh, it's this fearful thing. And so we're going to make this reactive decision. And then we just kind of keep spiraling down rather than spiraling up. But often what happens is we're just looking at things from one perspective and we forget that there is another choice. That you said perspective is something that we get to choose. Beautiful phrase that is an amazing way to shift out of a crappy attitude or mindset or perspective is say what you're not changing, you're choosing. And so when you say, I'm choosing to let this fear stop me in my tracks, I'm choosing to allow this uncertainty to affect how I'm leading my team right now, I'm choosing not to focus on the wins, but rather to put more of my energy into what's not working. And then it's like, oh, if I'm choosing that, then I can change what I'm choosing.
That is so powerful because you're giving people back their agency, but you're almost like forcing them to
Yes.
face their agency that they think that they often don't have, that we often think that we don't have when we are
Yes.
paralyzed by fear and stuck in a perspective.
Yes, I think my whole essence of everything that I talk about is about taking your agency, your power back because we like to outsource it to everything else because sometimes it feels easier than actually owning and making those decisions. But in reality, if we want whatever we want in life, in our career, in the way that we lead and show up, it's like you've got to remember that you have the power to change that. You have the power to influence and mold. And like we create the reality that we see because literally it's like those black and white pictures where it's like if you focus on the white part it's like a different picture than the black part of the image. It's like we can literally change what we're seeing by what we choose to focus on, and that's why it's so important to shift that perspective. And I want to talk more about agency, but there's one other thing I want to share before we move on from that of like navigating this fear and uncertainty. What happens is we're in a culture, we're in an age where we use like I am an emotion, like I am anxious, I'm an anxious person, I am really afraid. And it creates this identity of everything basked in anxiety or fear or whatever. And a big shift that I have learned is this idea of these different parts of ourself. It's called like internal family systems therapy or parts work. It's like the big shift that I've made is like there is a part of me who is terrified. There is a part of me that is so afraid. And there's also a part of me who is like, I'm a badass. I'll work through anything. I know my mission and vision. And like that badass part of me can come and send some love and comfort to to the part of me that's feeling anxious and afraid and say, come, we got this. I got you. Like, we're going to be okay. And oftentimes, rather than being like, I need this anxiety to go away, it's like, how can we really just send that little part of ourselves some love? Because it's like our little inner child all grown up. But I think it helps us to stop getting caught up as like, this is my identity. This is who I am. It's just a part of who we are.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you brought up parts and internal family systems. That's something I work on also with clients all the time and within myself all the time because frankly, right, we're all human. And I often call them saboteurs as well, whatever is resonant for folks. And I what's really tricky about that is first off, the parts and these voices trick you to think that they are protecting you, right? That they are the safety when you are in a place of uncertainty.
Mm,
And they believe that they are keeping you safe because at some point your little child or the version of yourself when that part developed really was protecting you. You
mm,
needed it for survival. But we grow out of that and
mm,
we have more experiences and we realize we have more agency and more independence and more strength that we don't have to still use that same survival mechanism. We don't have to let them take over the
mm.
wheel of the car when we are in these really difficult, uncertain situations. But it's our default because it's been happening for so long. So
Yeah.
what's so powerful about bringing that up and what you were saying is like first just identifying that these parts of like I am a whole person that is made up of so many different parts. We are all very complex and acknowledging that and starting to identify and meet your parts and
Mhm,
realize there's a scared one, there's a strong one, there's the powerful one, there's the jealous one, whatever it might be.
mhm.
And then from there, being able to name them when they arise, because what we're talking about here is hard work. We're talking about habits, like changing the way your brain operates, right? Changing your habits.
Yeah.
What do you do? How do you support your clients in putting that like incredible work into practice so that when they are like in that fight or flight, crazy fear driven mode, they're actually able to make that change and like send that compassion to themselves?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a powerful question. And the way that I've learned about these different kind of parts of ourselves and emotions, it's not like one is bad and one is good. I spent a lot of time in my life trying to be like innately trying to be a perfectionist because I inherently just didn't think I was good enough, which once I learned about the subconscious brain, like, lots of people are doing that. It's our nature. But I had this kind of realization moment when I was at a retreat and a meditation where I was trying to always be this like badass, can run through walls. Like invincible version of myself or part of myself. And therefore, because I'm human, because I get tired and I need rest, and there's a part of me that's scared and afraid and wants to hold back, I felt like that was impossible. That version of success was impossible. And I had this real like reckoning moment of being like, oh, wow, the higher self version of me who's like created this life, this business, this beautiful big life that I want is not more perfect than me now. It's the version of me who's accepted that I'm not.
Mm.
And I think that's a beautiful thing because when I talk to clients about this, it's like, you don't need to get rid of your anxiety. What you need to do is not let that take over your state.
Yeah.
Because when we get wrapped up into it, and a lot of what happens is we get so in our heads, we're always thinking, we're always strategizing, we're always trying to figure everything out. The smarter you are, the more likely you are to be doing this, right? And we're so disconnected from actually feeling. Like we're so afraid to feel the fear that we just try to think our way out of it. And the answer is really to like connect your head and your body. And the biggest way that I've shifted that is like using your breath and coming back into doing practices like meditation. I have my clients do these like activation meditations to connect with different versions of themselves at different points in time. And like realizing that there are all these different versions of us that we get to tap into and like lean on for advice. We are not just like that one part.
Yeah. And it actually brings everything we've talked about together because we think about these different parts and it's like, how do I choose something different. First, getting into your body, recognizing, wait, I can finding safety and regulation despite the fear and getting out of your head
Mhm.
that can convince you of anything. I love the way you said that of thinking, not thinking your way through it. You have to bring your mind and your body together. And we so often forget that. But then the what to once you get in that body and you realize and you start to breathe, that's where there also is a chance to bring back in those other perspectives because the part is just one perspective once again. So going back to the
Mhm.
perspective taking. So how what are your like I like work one through this all the time, but how do you access different more perhaps courageous, more productive perspectives once you kind of get out of the place of the fear or part,
Yeah.
hijacking you.
Yeah, great question. So, one of the things that I like to talk about is this idea of being like the CEO of your career and your life. And I'm not the only person who's ever said that, but I don't think people really often define what that means. And so, I'm going to just take a second to define how I think about that. But like being the CEO, it's like the chief executive officer, but it's also the chief like energy officer of like
Mm,
where are you putting your energy? And when you think about like a really strong CEO, they have a really clear vision and they set their boundaries and standards for like how do we operate in service of this vision and this mission. They set priorities and non-goals. What are we not focused on? They have to decide where are we directing our energy and focus. They get to figure out who gets a seat at the table. Not everybody gets an opinion about what we do. They have radical responsibility. They have their personal power of like the buck stops with me. I am the decision maker. And I think we need to embrace that for ourselves. And so one of the activities that I sometimes do with clients is like, let's activate your CEO alter ego. So there is a version of you who is always rooted in your personal power, has tapped into your agency, who has clarity on where you want to get to. You know your priorities. How do you handle turbulent times? Kind of predetermining what is my relationship to risk, to change, to challenge, to letting other people influence my vision and where I'm going and what I'm doing with my life. And when you kind of predetermine who that version of you is that you want to show up as, the version of you who creates this amazing life that you want to build or career, whatever it is, then you can start to tap into that. And
mm.
you can tap into that through saying, what is this version of me believe? How can I repeat affirmations every day? How can I sit there and really visualize like I'm talking to this version of myself and getting advice from him or her? You would be shocked at the amazing advice that you can get from yourself when you are tapped into yourself. There's so many ways to connect with and embody and start to act as if today you already are that version. But it starts with like defining that character, almost like you're casting a movie and you want this character, like this is a character that we are rooting for. Who are they? How do they show up? What do they look like? How do they behave in the world? How do other people perceive them? And like defining how you want that to be, and then you act as if that's already true.
Yeah. And I see that too time and time again of the power of not just visualizing, but creating and tapping into the version of yourself that maybe you didn't think exists or but you can imagine can exist. And before you know
Hmm.
it, you are them because you are able
Yeah,
to embody what you can envision.
that's a really great way of saying it. You are able to embody what you can envision.
And the version I do with that to build to give, because I've never thought about the embodying your own CEO, that is incredibly powerful. I talk a lot about tapping into your inner leader. So like the most wise sage version of yourself to lead you through, like what would they tell you to do right now? And sometimes I
Hmm.
don't know if you struggle with this at all, but sometimes folks struggle to access that of themselves. But what can be a way into that is to think about what is somebody that you admire or aspire to.
Hmm.
Just yesterday, actually, in the workshop I was doing, we did something similar, and it was like, who was your best coach, your best leader that was most transformational for you? And taking a moment to name them, to connect to the traits of
Mm.
them, remind what did they do for you? What about them has made them so inspirational or memorable for you? And then prompting to remember to say that that's a perspective you can always tap into. What
Hmm.
would Ted do? What would Chris do? What would these are just named Susan do, different leaders that came up in the room. And because I think sometimes it might take people time to say who is that version of myself that I want to be? But
Mhm.
until you can create that, you can tap into other perspectives that can give you that same insight and advice. You're like, "Oh, wow, I'm just in my own mind right now." But by just inviting in a different question and perspective, I have so much clarity that I didn't even have.
Yeah, I like that a lot of like, okay, borrowing this perspective from other people. And I think that's also why it's so important to be in rooms and spaces and conversations that expand you of other people where you're like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even know that I could think like that." And something the other, we were talking a little bit about long term vision, but I find so many people think that what I want is 5 to 10 years away. It's always 5 to 10 years away. Well, it's always going to be that way if you never start really operating as if it could be any closer or if you could start working toward it. And we have this beautiful thing called podcasts where you can take people that you look up to who are super successful, who have given all of their wisdom on these kinds of recordings. Like you can go on YouTube, you can let's go on Spotify and find how do these people think? Because I think knowing like what is the frame, what is the perspective, that is what's allowed me to like build the business that I've built. Because I was like, how do people who I look up to who created what I want to create, how do they think about investing in themselves? How do they think about taking risks? How do they think about uncertainty? How do they stay steady in the storm?
Mhm.
And those perspectives, whether it's from distance of like listening to a podcast or an audio training, or close proximity of like working with people one on one, has completely shifted how I view those kinds of situations. And I think that's a big important part for leading through change. How do people you look up to lead through change
Mm.
operate like that?
I think sometimes we have access to so much, we fail to remember that so
Yeah,
much of what we need is actually really right at our fingertips, and we feel almost paralyzed by the choice.
for sure.
And the ability that there is so much influence that can be really productive when sometimes it feels like we're filled with so much noise that we don't know what to cut through with. How do you like, what have you found for yourself? How do you, I love what you said, like, stay steady through the storm. How do you keep yourself steady through the storms? And have there been any storms recently you've had to steady yourself through?
It's a good question. I didn't always stay very steady through the storm. In fact, I feel like actually at this retreat that I was at in June, I had this realization. I drew it in my notebook and then I went to the front and I drew it in front of everyone and I was like, does anyone else feel like this? And I felt like I was on this roller coaster of being too much, not enough. Feeling so abundant in the scarcity mode, feeling like things are going really well and crashing out like things are going terrible. And it was exhausting, just constantly feeling like on these high highs and these low lows. And I'm like, I can't keep living this way. And this was when I started to realize that like I was always trying to be at this highest high and expecting that and wanting that. And anything below that felt really bad. And it wasn't until I had this realization that like the lows are part of it. The lows are where we grow and we stretch. Like when I reflect backwards on my journey, like the other day, I did this masterclass and talked for almost 2 hours about what have been the ups and downs of my journey. Like the really challenging parts are the times that I grew the most and I'm the most proud of. But in the moment, you're like, holy crap, I can't believe I'm in this. And so I think for me, like the biggest things that have helped me shift out of that is just the recognition, first of all, that like the human experience is about the contrast. It's about the polarity of these like really great times and these really challenging times. And when we look back, we wouldn't appreciate the great times without the challenge. And the challenges are what helps to create that growth that allows us to continue to expand. So, like, one is just acceptance. So, like, we shouldn't always try to be feeling amazing all the time, nonstop. It's not human. And the second piece of it is having a community where I can be really, truly, authentically myself. Knowing that there are other people who are doing this work who can have these kinds of conversations with me and challenge and mirror back to me where I need to grow and where I need to
Yeah.
shift and encourage me to not like giving me the answers, but to ask those questions and get these answers for myself, like different perspectives, like having a really truly authentic community. And then like the third piece I would say is a lot of that somatic stuff. Like I used to just be so in my head, so anxious, always trying to like strategize my way out of things. And really, I think for me, meditation has been a huge unlock to create space to really connect deeper within myself, connect to my body. And from that place, I feel so much more grounded and like I have a lot more self love that's kind of come out of that practice. Maybe strangely enough, I don't know. But I feel now that my inner critic is a lot quieter because I am so clear on like what is my vision, what is my mission, what am I working toward, that the temporary dips are small compared to like why am I doing this? And I
Right.
actually think that so many people feel so uncertain and unsteady because they have no idea what their deeper why actually is. And there's no grounding greater force that's pulling them forward. It's just like, I'm going to try to react to what's in front of me and navigate this. And that's why it's so stressful when the external world is like throwing all this stuff at us.
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank you for sharing and how deeply I feel connected to what you said. I understand and identify with that very personally. And what I heard in the three things that you shared, there's so much I want to unpack from that. But first
There's
is
a lot.
no, it's so beautiful. I don't want to forget anything. But in the three parts you mentioned, how I interpret that was around like acceptance is around a lot of self-compassion and then connection with others and connection to self through the practice of
Hmm.
meditation or connection with body and physical self. But you also mentioned that that has created more self-love through that and perhaps more self-acceptance. And I wonder in this season, because I feel like we were probably both very, very similar in our old lives, very, very ambitious professionals who probably were very hard on ourselves
Hmm.
to try to get reach those, you know, pillars of success. What does self-love or self-compassion look like for you now in this season?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I used to have this really strong, not inner critic of like, wow, you suck. I can't believe you're doing this. But mostly for me, it comes up around procrastination. So I have learned that one of the main reasons that I will procrastinate on something is because I have a fear of failure or fear of success, like the burden that comes with, what if this thing actually works out? What happens then? And so I would subconsciously, procrastinate and not do things. And then I would go through this procrastination shame spiral, which I think a lot of high performers do. Like, if I really sit down and I have a deadline, like I can get a lot done, but I will wait until there is this urgent deadline. And I still sometimes do that. But I used to really, really beat myself up of like, if I don't have this version of myself that's like, whip it into shape like drill sergeant, then how am I going to get things done? And I really thought like, if I'm not coming from this place of push, I'm just going to be lazy and do nothing. And I think in this journey, I have really learned that the love, like there is an act of self love that is the discipline to say, oh, this is something I really care about. And I love myself enough to work on it. And it's more of a pull than a push. And I think that has been a big unlock of there's times where I'm also just able to zoom out a little bit and be like, no, 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 I am working really hard on the things that I say I care about and I'm doing the best that I can as a human. I think that whole journey of understanding that like I can't expect myself to be on these high highs running through walls, like I can get anything done mode all the time. And accepting that has allowed my inner critic of you should always be getting things done. You can't be, slowing down to quiet a little bit and to just appreciate that there's different seasons of the journey. Times I feel like sprinting and times where I'm like, I need a little bit more rest right now. And when I zoom out, I'm still working really hard on the things that I say that I care about moving forward.
The meeting yourself where you are, learning to accept that versus judge that, and then once again giving yourself that perspective, zooming out and saying, just because I did, couldn't complete my list of things that I thought I would accomplish today, doesn't mean I'm not actually making the strides or progress towards that deeper why, the bigger vision.
Yeah.
And I too, I wrestled so hard. I think I'm so glad you named that, you thought that you had to really push in order for you to be successful. And I see that I get a lot of pushback from leaders. I don't know if this comes up in your work, but I get a lot of pushback that they're like, I think that that voice of criticism is really helpful for me. And I go, I hear you. And there are probably ways that it is helpful. There's probably like a 5 to 10% truth that it is, but if it was so helpful, then those strategies would have worked by now. We probably wouldn't be having this conversation,
Fair
and you wouldn't
enough.
be so unhappy and unfulfilled and frustrated or whatever it
Yeah.
is that you are navigating. And they are so sneaky that convince you that that is the only way. Once again, very fear
Hmm.
driven. And so I had very loud voices myself, and I was really stressed. I was really anxious. And I just knew, similar to what you talk about a lot, was like I knew I was meant for more. I know that that's what you speak to, and knew that there was something else for me that didn't have to look like this. But I
Mm.
first knew I had to like unlearn some of this and like get out of this like wheel and of all this stress and like overwhelm and like just was making myself sick, basically. So once I
Mm,
got out of it, I don't know what your transition was like, but once I got out of advertising in the agency world, I I also got married. I moved to California. All happened really quickly, a lot of change. Here I am living by the ocean, running a business, doing work that I love, walking by the ocean every day. Like I didn't have the same stresses that I had before, the same things to achieve, but yet the narrative was the same. And I realized I'm like, I'm still quite stressed out. I'm still quite hard on myself. And I'm not feeling that kind of bliss, happy, and peace that I thought I would
mm,
have by making these massive shifts. So, like, what really needs to change here? And I realized I need to change my relationship to myself. There's a different powers here inside of me that are controlling this, that are not the external factors of my
mhm,
job and circumstance and environment, that I can have greater control over, that I need to understand. So that's what started my journey into a world of self-compassion. I did my own retreat that was
mm.
extremely powerful for me, where I was able to learn that the power of kindness and meeting yourself where you are, as you mentioned, and finding self compassion can be far more motivating, far more productive, and far more healthy to get you to reach the goals you want to achieve than by bullying yourself through it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a kind of like a framework around this that fits perfectly with what you just said. And then I also want to touch on that idea of like external changes, but the internal needs to shift as well. So I want to come back to that.
Yeah,
But
please.
I wish I could draw right now. If we could draw a little triangle, there's three ICs that we all have, and it's not the individual contributor. We've got the inner critic, the inner child, and the inner cheerleader. And if I think about, it's like when we say, oh, this inner critic is loud, like I need that to encourage myself. It's like who we're talking to is really that inner child. For me, I always picture myself like 8 years old. And it's like whatever age comes to mind. I have this like really cute picture of myself. I don't even know if I'm 8, but I just think I am. I always think about that. And it's like if you're coaching a child, are you going to yell at them and be like, I can't believe you didn't do this. Come on, get it together. Hurry up, you're better than this. Or are you going to be like the inner cheerleader that's like, no, no, you got this. Like, I'm here to support you. We're going to rise together. Like, I see this for you. I believe in you. Like, what is more motivating for that inner child? It is the inner cheerleader cheering them on, where this kid's like, heck yeah, I want to rise to the occasion, not like I feel beaten down and therefore I will try harder so I don't get beaten down.
Mhm.
And it's like we have this opportunity every day to reparent ourselves and like give ourselves the love that we really truly deserve to rise. And it's like, what's a better way to like parent your children or to coach a children's team? Like it's so obvious. And yet when it's ourselves, we have this loud critic. Sometimes I
Yeah.
even tell clients, like, if you're struggling to have this compassion for yourself, imagine that you are your friend. Or if you're struggling to hype yourself up and believe in your value, like imagine you're hyping up like the best person you've ever worked with. Like obviously you're good at your job. Obviously you know what you're doing, and it's just like we have this harshness to ourselves because we know all of our inner thoughts. We know all of our doubts and our fears and our anxieties, and we don't see that from other people.
Thank you for sharing it. Guys, write that down, take the notes, pick up the gems. I love the inner cheerleader as being that voice of um, support and encouragement. So, often like that voice can sound different. And I think that's important to acknowledge too. A lot of folks, as I introduce them to self compassion, it is softer. It is the more self acceptance. It's, I'm doing the best I can with what I've got. I am capable of this. Or the kind of narrative of just really showing yourself the love or the support that you really want from somebody else, but you can't always expect it from someone else, but you can learn to expect it from
Yeah.
yourself. But that isn't the only way that compassion
Hmm.
can surface and be supportive. It can be that cheerleader. It can be fierce too. It can say like, you have a greater vision than this. This is what
Hmm.
you need to do, Go take care of this because this is what is best for you. You've worked hard for this. You can handle this, right? So there are different tones
Hmm.
that voice of compassion or a cheerleader can take, but they all are rooted from a place of self-love, self-advocacy, and belief in yourself and support of yourself versus judgment and shame.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I think that's really important to call out. Like sometimes we think of self compassion as just like letting ourselves off the hook. And well, if I did that, then I'm not going to get anything done. When in reality, like compassion is saying, I don't really want to go to the gym and then meditate afterward today, but I know it makes me feel good. So I'm going to do it anyways. Like that's an act of love. It's the same way you would call out your close family member, like, hey, I love you enough to say, like, you're not leading yourself down a path that you want to go down or whatever. Like having those hard conversations out of a place of love, of like, I want something better for you.
Talk about courage. It takes a lot of courage for self and for others. But there was
Yeah.
something else you wanted to chat about. I don't wanna take you away from that.
Yeah, what you said around like, okay, I shifted all these external things and therefore I should have been feeling this like light and flow and
Yes.
ease and joy all the time. And it's such a good reminder that like the most important relationship we have is with ourselves and we cannot escape ourselves. Like we are always there in every moment. And like it's so important again of like what you focus on, what that perspective is, knowing that I like to think about like redefining ambition in a way because the old version of me who was ambitious was like, I want all these external things so I can get all this external validation that, I got the promotion, I could prove to myself that I'm good enough for these things. And now when I think about ambition, I think about it more from like this place of service and also like belief of like who do I get to become on this continuous journey of trying to go bigger and stretch myself. It's not about the achievement, it's about the journey of who do I get to become. Like I'm proud of myself that I built a successful business that feels really aligned for me and I have so much more that I want to create in this world, so much more that I want to put out. But it's less about I always thought, okay, it's a certain milestone. I'm going to feel so proud of it. And it's feels proud you're proud of it for like a day, maybe. And it's like what I'm more proud of, like the challenges that I went through that I overcame, of continuing to refine what is my message? What do I stand for? How do I want to be seen? And doing the things that were scary. And so I think it's like for leaders who are feeling afraid or feeling like, oh gosh, it's like, what do you want to be proud of yourself for when you're 80 years old? Like, what do you want to look back on your life and say, yeah, in the difficult moment, I made the more empowering choice?
Yeah. What I hear in that is how to remain connected to your values so that you are leading yourself through in a way that makes you proud as you look back and being really connected to your legacy.
Yeah.
How do you get connected to and that can change, but how do you have that bigger why, that bigger vision, as you said, pulling you forward versus and being in a place where you are in control versus being so reactionary all the time. You're more responsive, you're more in control. But you had mentioned earlier about this idea of like the bigger why, the
Hmm.
vision, the purpose that often people don't have. How do you help people find and identify that? Because I notice that is so tricky for many
Yeah.
folks,
Yeah. I think
especially
it's
right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of different layers to clarity and purpose and vision, etc. But I think it always, always, always has to start from a place of self-connection and learning about yourself. And the way that I personally help people start to get some clarity around, what do I want next? What do I want to transition into? What am I craving right now? Without just focus on, I think most people are focused on like, what can I get? What's possible for me? When we operate out of that frame, we limit ourselves dramatically to the version of ourselves right now who sees such limited possibilities. But the way that I like to think about it is let's connect with first those different versions of ourselves and like connect. I literally do this in the work I do with clients. It's like when you're 80 years old, what do you want to be known for? What do you want to leave behind? How do you want to be remembered? In 5 years from now, which I love the timeline of 5 years from now because it's easy enough to imagine, but it's far enough that a lot can change. Like 5 years from now, what do you want to be? Who do you want to be in your life? What kind of titles and identities you want to have? What do you want to be doing? And what do you want to have? What do you want to have created in your life? And you can like really picture that vision. And then you can back up into, okay, well, a year from now, what does that need to look like? What can I shift immediately to start to more align with this vision? And that's a little bit more of the high level piece of like getting to know yourself. We have so many more answers than we think. What usually people are not clear on is the pathway to getting there. When we take the time, it's like, okay, I kind of understand myself. I know the deeper why. I know some of the things that I value, that I care about. But the question is, how am I going to get there? Is it going to be possible? And what I like to shift people into is rather than, is it possible? We move into, how might I? Like, what would need to be true for me to get there? And sometimes that is maybe more challenging than you initially want. And it's a decision of like, do I want it badly enough? And I think a lot of people don't have that deeper why enough. And so when something's a little too hard or a little too challenging, they bounce to the next thing and hope that's going to magically click. And they're constantly bouncing between all these different things, feeling like, oh, nothing's right. I haven't found my thing yet. When in reality, it starts by saying, what do I want to be devoted to? What do I want to be committed to finding and to figuring out? And then it gives you enough drive to say, yeah, this is challenging, but I know why I'm doing this.
Yeah, those are incredible tools. And what that sparked in me too was often I think we can get really paralyzed. Like what you said is so powerful is like how to create focus despite, once again, the fear and uncertainty of trying to do something big and risky that requires a lot of courage or
Hmm.
thinking about yourself and your future differently. And see this with friends or, leaders I work with when they want to be navigating big career changes. And they get so paralyzed by thinking about all the things that they need to do and all the decisions they need to make and like what are things going to look like, even if it's just like 3 weeks from now, 3 months from now, not even the longer term. And I often tell them, like, when you're getting into that, what's like the next right thing? How do you know what the
Hmm.
next right thing is for yourself, whether it's a big decision or just like, what do I need to get done today? So, how do you create a focus so you don't get paralyzed by the amount of decisions and overwhelm that can just
Yeah.
make you go to a place of inaction?
Yeah, right. I think, I mean, we've been talking about this idea of like having a longer term vision of what you want to create. And I very
Hmm.
specifically use the term vision and not goals. Goals can be helpful when they're like really
Hmm.
clear and specific, but I think we can get really tripped up on goals because when we think about a vision, there's also, we connect back to the version of yourself who lives in that vision. How does that version of you show up in that world? They have probably different skills, different beliefs and behaviors and habits. They interact with the world differently. They're perceived a little bit differently. And so that version of you who's created that vision, how do they need to show up now? In this, all this stuff's going on around me. How can I make the decision that moves me just a little bit closer to that vision by acting like that version of me today? And it's not like, oh, I need to have this 5-year plan. And if one thing goes wrong, oh my gosh, my plan is gone. It's not about planning. It's about taking action from that place with the intention of, "Oh, okay, I know where this is leading me. And if I take a step this way and it's not the thing, I'll take another step." But it's all about knowing what you want to align to. And I think when people are lacking that, they're just, again, so reactive to what's right in front of us. And it's a
Yes.
very exhausting way to live.
Yeah. And then you're using up, talk about lack of agency because you're giving up all your energy into what isn't actually productive for you and isn't actually working towards what you want to
Yeah.
achieve.
Yeah.
And then that's what that fuels a greater self doubt, right? So there's like pathways here that really can
Yeah.
kickstart either journey of what we talked about today, one full of courage, perspective taking, embodiment, and possibility, or of lack of agency and exhaustion and fear driven and
Yeah.
parts managing us that we are, that aren't productive for us.
Yeah, and most of us end up on that second track until we literally
Hmm.
have this line in the sand moment of like, I refuse to keep living my life this way. I cannot do this anymore. Like, it's a decision to see things differently. It's a decision to say, even though it's challenging, I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but I'm going to figure it out. And I think some people have to hit rock bottom to feel that. And other people maybe have a really powerful conversation with someone and it shifts. But there's like that line in the sand moment of like, cool. I'm not doing it that way anymore. I'm finding another way to live. And then we get to go on this beautiful journey of like discovering who we want to be and stepping into that. There's another thing you said earlier about like leaders really paralyzed about changing things and taking risks. And I know we wanted to talk a little bit about like the appetite and perspective on risk, the relationship with risk. How I wanted to talk about this because when we think about that, like 80-year-old version of ourselves, if we all, if we can ideally make it that far, it's like the version of me who's like talking to my great grandkids. I want to be able to tell these like incredible stories about what I've created. And I don't want to be like, oh, I was too scared to do that. I wanted to do that and I just never did it while I could. Like, kids, you should do it differently. Like, I want to be able to, from a really embodied place, say, I lived life full out and I did not let any kind of fear hold me back from doing the things that I wanted to do. And I think if we can really tap into like the riskier move is actually being in the exact same place in 5 years from now and saying, I wish I would have. Like that to me is the most risky thing you can do because it feels safer. But what feels really unsafe is the discomfort of regret, the discomfort of knowing that like I didn't really fulfill my potential or even try. And that's like, to me, the most risky thing I can do. If I am stressed about getting back to where I've already been there. I've already done that before. I can do it again, but I'm not going to know what my edges are until I try to explore them. And the people who live really big, amazing lives and have these great careers, they didn't do it by playing small and like knowing everything was going to work out perfectly before making a move. They did it scared and then they built the plane while they were flying it. They leaped and found the parachute on the way down. That's just how it works.
They found their own resilience and their own capabilities. And I couldn't agree more. There's often I'll talk to folks who feel like they're like, "Well, I'm really comfortable. I don't know if I wanna make a change. I don't know if I'm ready to take that risk." And I go, "Are you comfortable though? Because it actually sounds like you're deeply uncomfortable. You are, just like you said, sitting in the comfort of the safety of what's known, but that's actually making you miserable. So, like, let's think
Mhm.
about this a little bit. Do you wanna continue to be in this place of quote unquote perceived comfort where you're miserable every day or overwhelmed or stressed and feeling like you're not reaching your own potential and frustrated and resentful? Like, who's that gonna be in 5 years, in 10 years?
Right. Right.
Versus stepping into a place of temporary discomfort that could lead to greater growth.
Yeah.
It's That's where that courage comes in. It's like being willing that despite in the face of fear, you take that step forward versus that step backwards.
I think a lot of people are waiting for confidence to come before courage, but being courageous creates the confidence. Like, I'm the type of person who did that thing. Well, I guess my confidence levels can rise because I did that thing. There's something else you said in there that was really important. When you talk
Oh,
about
good.
being uncomfortable, it's
Mhm.
oftentimes when people ask me, Katie, like, I want to make a change, but I don't hate my life enough yet. Like, I don't feel I'm as motivated as I did. They don't say it that way, but it's like, I'm not as motivated. How do I get more motivated? And I say, well, what happens if nothing changes for another year? You're in the exact same place. Like, we can spread out, like project out, okay, well, that's deeply uncomfortable. Okay, you don't have to wait until you get there. You can make the change now. And I think a lot of people are waiting until they hit that kind of like rock bottom moment when it becomes even more difficult to make a change from that place.
I know, and such interesting human behavior to feel like I have to be suffering enough to allow myself the freedom,
Yeah.
the permission to pursue something that is more fulfilling or
Yeah.
aligned for myself. Like,
Right.
we almost don't deserve it. I notice that more also with women than I do with men,
Mm.
which is interesting, and
Yeah.
talk about that rock bottom place or that moment, that line in the sand, as you said. And as we start to wrap up this conversation, even though I feel like we could talk for so much longer, what was your story? I know you and I are very aligned in the perspective of choosing possibility over fear. And it's something I bring to light for many people. And I'm always curious to know what was your defining story of when you chose and discovered the power of choosing possibility over fear for yourself.
Very big question. I think there are a lot of moments within my journey, but I guess maybe I'll go back to when it started. And I was very much what I call like of climbing the ladder of success that was laid out for me and like going for the next promotion. I was working consulting and I was taking agency over my career in a way. And I had navigated myself into what I thought was going to be like the coolest, most interesting work that I could do within the firm on the team that I wanted to be in. And I was like, I hate this. I don't want to get promoted. What am I working toward? And that was the first time in my life that I really took a step back. There was a book I read called, I'm blanking on the name of it right now, Quarter Life Breakthrough.
Mm,
And it was like, okay, let me like go to a coffee shop every Sunday and sit there and journal about these questions. And some of that has informed the way that I help people get clarity today, along with a few other things. But I started for the first time in my life to say, what would I do if I was unafraid to fail? Because I was so deeply afraid of failure. Like, that's why I wasn't okay with A's. I wanted to get A pluses. Like, I was that kind of person. And I knew, like, when I removed that fear for a second, So let me park my disbelief. I was like, I know I want to have my own business. I didn't know what it would be. I had no idea, but I knew, okay, I've got an idea about this longer term thing. And when I was in high school, I wanted to be a motivational speaker and have a personal brand. Hello. Okay. Kind of doing that on my way. But I always knew that I wanted to like be out there, to be seen, to be more visible, but I didn't know what kind of business I wanted. And that's okay. You don't have to have this light bulb moment. But what it allowed me to do is say, okay, well, what's going to get me closer to that? What next move is going to help me learn skills that I need, build some more of that mentality? So I was like, let me go join a startup. It'll solve for some other things that I also want to learn next. And I use that like a training ground of like, what is it like to build a company? What is it like to hire teams and build a business and, figure out all that stuff. And it really was like the right next move to help me get closer to the vision. It wasn't like I had to have this perfect roadmap of like, when am I going to start this business? What is it going to be? It was like, okay, I trust that taking this next move is going to help me get there. And in fact, that transition was really challenging for me. And that is like going from being a generalist in consulting, not knowing what I wanted to do, to landing the next role, thriving at this startup, and then kind of getting myself immersed in the recruiting world. That is how I built my accelerator program, the Purposeful Path Accelerator, which is like out of that pain and that challenge that I went through, I can now help other people solve for that, no problem. And
Mm.
had I tried to like solve for that in advance, I wouldn't know. But it was like I had this longer term idea of like, let me work closer to that. And it all kind of unfolds as it does. And it continued many, many times throughout that to have to tap into courage and say, who am I to be doing that? Well, who am I not to? What version of me feels comfortable doing that? Who do I need to become?
Yeah. And what I want to underscore what you said is like how to make the next decision that moves you closer to it. You don't have to go from 0 to 100 of like you're
Yeah.
living that vision the next day. That's not possible. And I think that's what people often think it is. Like they're like, I don't know. That's a huge change. I don't know how to do that. It's like, you're right. You don't need to know. What's the next right decision that gets
Hmm.
you closer to becoming that person, to learning those skills, as you mentioned? And I had a very similar path myself of just how do you start finding the doors to open to
Hmm.
guide you down the next level of that journey to get you
Yeah.
closer to living
Yeah.
your vision.
And we
Thank
we
you for
talked a little
sharing.
before. Yeah, yeah, I mean, I could talk for hours about this, but, like, we talked a little before about habits and, like, the
Yeah,
importance of that habit. That is one of the easiest things to start with. I wouldn't
yeah,
have started my business if I hadn't 4 weeks earlier said, "I'm gonna go to the gym every day and become a gym girl." 'Cause it
mhm,
showed me, "Oh, I am disciplined. I can commit
mhm.
to something. I can do things that are hard even when I don't want to." And without that, I don't know that I would have thought I'm the type of person who could start a business. Like, the habits that we do could be literally the first thing you can do to, like, start to believe more in yourself is, like, shift your habits.
Once again, get the courage to build the confidence, find the proof points to believe in yourself versus just
Yeah.
expecting it to arrive one day.
Yeah, exactly.
So you are someone that leads himself with so much clarity, so much self-connection, so much self-belief, and I know that's what you do to support professionals every day. So I know people are listening, are inspired by what you shared, are, like, writing down all the gems and tools that you've been kind enough to gift us today. So how can folks find you, work with you? I know you have some really exciting things in the work. Let's tell people about it.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me here and like giving me this platform to share. And because, as you guys can tell, I'm so passionate about these things. Most of my content is on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. I think the link will be in the show notes. And then if you are somebody who's like, I actively want to get clarity in what I want to do next, I'm making an immediate transition and I want to figure out what that next right role looks like, then you would be a good fit for my accelerator program. We help you get ultimate clarity in what you want and confidently make that transition, really build the tools to thrive in the transition. So that's a really amazing community and program. I'm also doing something really exciting right now. I'm hosting a retreat called Meant for More Retreat. It's an immersion experience, really taps into all of this identity work, this longer term vision, this like purpose and self belief in a container in a room of people who are just witnessing you in your growth and holding space for you to continue to expand. So there's lots more I could say. That's happening November 7th through 9th. So if you're listening after that, hit me up for maybe the next one. We'll see TBD. But if that sounds exciting, please reach out and we'll chat. Just DM me on LinkedIn.
I'm envious thinking of all the professionals in that room because I know it'll be a special space if they tap into just a bit of what we did today. So, Katie, thank you so much for getting unfiltered with us today and for all that you had to share. I know we are smarter, we are wiser, we are more self connected or have the tools to be more self connected thanks to you. So I appreciate your
Thank you so
clarity.
much.
Have a wonderful day. And thanks you all so much for listening and joining us today. We will be back soon.
Thank you. Bye, Lindsay.
Bye.